Hello, welcome to the interview.
Thank you.
What's your name and are you comfortable sharing a bit of your story with us today?
Sure. My name is Collincia Rouse. I am from North Carolina. I identify as Caribbean American because my parents are from the West Indies, and that's very important to them. Their culture is very important to them, and they taught us to make it important to us. I'm in Vancouver for a PhD in interdisciplinary studies, my background being in media and cultural studies. And I'm fascinated by the idea of community formation, especially when it comes to Black community. Being defined by many things. Yeah.
So, how do you feel your background growing up? How do you feel those experiences have shaped, um, that interest that you have?
Yeah. Okay. So, mm, because I was raised in such a specific way, the Caribbean, the West Indian way, the way that I interacted with my Black American counterparts were different. Like, things like nomenclature or slang or just values, they were different. And so it made me interested in learning how to be, I guess, more Black American. And I looked to television and movies to do that. And in doing so, I realized there isn't a lot of representation when it comes to nuance and Black identity. Like, there aren't a lot of like representations of people who come from Africa that aren't based solely on stereotypes, or people from the Caribbean um, being outside of Jamaica or just like speaking in that stereotypical way with dreads and weed. So growing up, searching for that sense of community and that sense of relation or seeing myself reflected was not there. And so I've dedicated my academic life to studying and seeing if there are people with similar experiences to me and how that has shaped their cultural identity and how they view the world and view themselves in the world.
So, you shared a little bit about, where you studied outside of America.
hmm
And how do you feel, or what has been your experience of being Black in all these different spaces?
when I went to England for my master's, the way that they view Blackness is different and specific, more so specific than America. A lot of the students that I went to school with felt very connected to either, like, if their parents were from somewhere in Africa, they felt connected to Africa or the Caribbean. Whereas in America, a lot of people have lost that connection because they have to be completely enveloped, assimilated, acculturated into American culture. So unless you live in cities like Atlanta or New York, where you have these specific enclaves that are represented, where countries are represented, like Little Guyana or Jamaica or Trinidad, you don't really have that experience. You kind of just get lumped in with every other Black American. And I'm not putting a value judgment saying that's good or bad, but it just feels like another way of losing culture and losing specificity for certain people. Um, Here in Canada, I've only been here a week. I haven't interacted with a lot of Black people. My supervisors are Black, but they're also both American. So I think we're all in this whole trying to figure out what it means to be Black in Canada and whether or not there's space or nuance for, being Caribbean and Black, or, African and Black, or whatever the specific, culture you represent or place that you represent is.
So, for someone unlike you who has traveled and who has been exposed to different Black experiences,
Mhm.
for someone who's maybe still in America or even in Canada, wherever they are, um, who don't have necessarily access to that experience,
Mhm.
where do you think they should start? Is it important for them to start? And because your early references were on TV, and it feels
Mhm.
like you were not satisfied with that. So, is Black history or Black heritage or archives of stories, are they easily accessible for? the Black community?
Black American history, yes. Outside of a classroom, if you seek it out, there is a large, rich well of information. But again, you have to consciously seek that information out and be in certain communities to have access to that information. When it comes to people wanting to know more about like specific cultures in Africa, like Yoruba, Igbo, like people from Kenya, like different cultures, that's a more difficult task. I think people seek out that information in the form of either watching influencers or celebrity types like Black is King by Beyonce, like that kind of thing, where it's not necessarily like an accurate, even though I take accurate is not the right word, but it's not like a well-rounded view of Africa, or like the specific countries or like a specific culture, like Black Panther, like these are all American versions of what Africa is. So I think if you are just a regular old Black or like generations in a Black American, it is difficult for you to find nuance in Black stories and to seek it out. Luckily, we have things like social media now, like Instagram or Twitter or um, TikTok, where people can see people from those countries telling their stories in their words. But I think we have leaps and bounds to go in terms of representation on screen.
So before this interview or this project,
Mhm.
had you heard of Hogan's Alley?
I have. I did my research. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I tend to live in places that are not majority Black. Outside of the Caribbean, every place I've lived in has been um, majority white spaces. And Vancouver is no different. But I wanted to see where it's always for me the first thing I search for is a sense of community where I can go and feel some sort of connection. Um, when I was in England, I looked for like the Black Student Association, their version of it. Um, there's a shell of a Black Student Association at UBC. And when I was just researching, I saw Hogan's Alley and Jimi Hendrix connection to it. I know that's the big name that people draw, but also how it's now essentially defunct. The community isn't there anymore, and so there's a there's a gap that needs to be filled because community is very important in terms of like just really across the board, mental, physical, all of the well-beings. It's helped by having a sense of community and a sense of belonging.
So when you think about Hogan's Alley
Mhm.
and maybe its legacy or lack thereof, and what you are currently studying, why is it important to what you're doing right now, and what are you hoping to create in the world?
Okay, yeah. I will just keep harping on the sense of community and how important it is for people everywhere. Because feelings of isolation, feelings of rejection, feelings of um, lack of sense of self uh, are very detrimental to a person's health. Um, in terms of Hogan's Alley and the Black community in Vancouver, I'm hoping to learn more about it and see if I can build my own version of it. Um, or oof, when it comes to my work, I think it's I welcome the challenge of studying Black culture and Blackness in a city so what's the polite word? A city that lacks so much of it, or at least in the present time. And what I hope to do is, I mean, it's a lofty goal, but to have someone read my research or be in conversation with me and feel seen and feel like they have a place or they can go out and create their own communities or create their own work that feels inclusive and makes them feel a part of something.
So when you're talking about having a sense of community or even just having community, why are these stories important for the community? And in bringing people together,
Mhm.
and because you're talking about, someone's wellness or someone's mental health even. So how do these stories, for you, how do you feel that these stories would help a community grow, like specifically the Black community? Why would these stories impact them, or how do you feel they would impact them?
Stories are how we live on. Stories are how communities grow. Stories are how we remember. Um, and it's so important to have that, especially with a community that is disappearing, to continue to tell these stories, to say people's names, to show their importance, because if we stop doing that, they disappear and they're gone. Um, and then it feels like their legacy was not respected, and not carried on. And I think it's very important to continue these stories and to have people remembered.
So what are you like, how do you feel that you're going to achieve that, or do you have any projects of your own that you would like to put out in the world? And also thinking, I think I was asking someone else the question about the our generation or
Hmm.
even the younger generation, because if you're feeling, like you're saying, if you're feeling disconnected and you don't know where you belong or where you came from, why should it matter to you? Why should it matter to the younger generation who have no idea of these beings?
That's a really good question. Naturally, I just care. I think it's important, uh, being from a marginalized community, to make sure that we don't continue with the marginalization, that we take up space, that we show that we matter. Um, and it's heartbreaking to hear that perhaps the younger generation doesn't feel like that's important. My goal, my desire in life is mostly to listen to the people that came before me and learn from them. And in that, to amplify their voices as well as my experiences, the experiences of my peers who may not have um, the voice that I have, because I'm quite loud and boisterous, and just to perpetually keep us alive by being in conversation, by listening, by learning.
I'm wondering if before you came to Canada, even, were you aware of any Black Canadian heritage? And whether it's a yes or no, what do you feel that says about Canada and our history as well?
Yes-ish. I know that a lot of my Katition family are like, we would never live in America because of racism. So they all settled in like Ontario and like Ajax and Toronto. Um, but I think it's not funny, but it's interesting, um the view that people have of America and their idea that American racism doesn't exist anywhere else, which might be true, but racism is everywhere. And Canada might be more subtle about it. England was definitely more subtle about it. It doesn't make it better. Maybe being raised in America, I prefer their racism. I'd rather you just straight up tell me to my face that you don't like me because of my skin color, and then I could know we're not cool, as opposed to you laughing and kikiing in front of my face, and then behind my back, you try to bring me down.
Sabrina mentioned earlier that Hogan's Alley used to be like a Black Hollywood.
Yeah.
And you know, um, that aside, just the general culture in Vancouver that you have experienced, within the week that you've been
Mhm.
here, how, like, do you see anything there, or how have you experienced it?
You mean like Black culture? No. I'm just gonna have to completely shift what I'm used to. Um, I didn't even, before I got here, I didn't really even make a conscious effort like, oh, I might need a hairbrush or an afro pick. Like, where would I go to get those things? Um, like stuff like that I didn't even think about because, living in America, it's so ubiquitous. You drive down the street and you can find a hair shop that has those needs for you. But being here, I've definitely thought about how I might need to shift my usual My usual comforts are no longer going to be my usual comforts. Um, I hope that'll change. I hope that my mind will change and that I will settle in and I will find a sense of community. I'll find someone who can give me really good box braids that I'll feel more connected. I don't know yet. Cautiously optimistic.
So, from your point of view, and from your accumulated experiences, and from everything that you've done so far, what do you feel would be maybe like one thing that we could do today to bring about that dream or that vision closer to having a community in Vancouver, building, or maybe even reinforcing that sense of community?
Hmm. That's a great question because how do you build a community from scratch in a place where you don't really know anyone? Um, and if there's nothing established, what how do you go about? I think it starts with one person. You make a friend and you're like, "Hey friend." Um, like it reminds me of this coworker of mine who said she just moved to Milan on a whim and every day she would go out to the park and sit there and have a picnic with herself and like if people wanted to come and talk to her, she would like welcome it and that kind of thing. And I think it might have to be a similar thing here. Two Black people hanging out in the park, having a meal together or whatever. Hopefully, more Black people are like, "Oh, hey guys, don't know you. Hey, let's," and that kind of slowly builds into something. This could be my American thinking. I don't know how Canadians work, but in my mind, that seems like a great idea to just have two people hanging out. If you see another Black person, like, "Hey, what's your story? Are you from here? We just moved. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, whatever?" I don't know. It could be too, I'm being too friendly American and Canadians don't want to be approached. I don't know. Just in my mind, that's the way that you build community.
So, in your mind as well, is there or are there any contributions to society, to the Canadian society, um, or from outside Canada, that you think that we should know about?
I should do more Canadian history. I don't know. I don't know of anything specific I could say, like, this Black Canadian did that. Yeah, no. Most of the Canadians I know are white. And literally the only Black, or like on screen, the only Black Canadian can think of right now that's coming to mind is that one lady that's in everything. She was like in Handmaid's Tale and sort of, and I saw her in a couple of other things. I don't know. But yeah, I can't speak to Black Canada yet and historically. Sorry.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.